I'm Rajan Patel, the product manager for Landscape at Canonical. I'm always excited to talk about performance and cost optimization for cloud workloads. Landscape manages Ubuntu at enterprise scale, and today we will deploy Landscape Beta on Oracle Public Cloud's free tier with Juju. Landscape is Canonical's systems management application. You get insight into any running physical or virtual machine or container, and have the ability to apply configurations and perform automations at scale. Landscape reduces risk from human error when managing systems. It exposes tooling for security and compliance. It provides inventory controls for hardware and software, and integrates with third-party software like Active Directory, security agents, and even chat and ticketing systems through an API. And guess what? You can deploy Landscape Beta with Juju. While the quick start installation is tempting and the manual install may be the familiar path, when you see how easy Juju makes installing, configuring, and maintaining Landscape, you will never want to set it up any other way. You reap the benefits of straightforward scalability and high availability when deploying via Juju. The Landscape Edge charms contain the current Landscape Beta codebase. This version of Landscape marks a significant departure from the legacy codebase. The Landscape charms are authored in Juju's new Reactive Framework. As for Landscape itself, in the beta, Landscape has shed some of its dependencies, and it installs seamlessly into the Focal and Jammy Ubuntu releases. Ubuntu versions 20.04 and 22.04, respectively. Landscape Beta will not install on Bionic, which is the code name for Ubuntu 18.04. Today, we will install Landscape Beta into LXD containers on a single machine with a valid SSL certificate. When installing a Landscape charm bundle, these applications are deployed as a collection, and you get out-of-the-box optimizations for performance and security. The charm bundle maps the relationships between each application, so you don't have to manually connect anything. Landscape's charm bundles come in 3 flavors. Landscape Scalable gives each service its own machine. You will need 5 machines in total, 4 for Landscape and 1 for the Juju controller node. Landscape Scalable makes the fewest assumptions about your environment and its constraints. It is the likeliest starting point for most users. In a few steps, we can deploy a scalable Landscape using Juju on an Ampere Altra-powered virtual machine on Oracle Public Cloud. I will deploy the Landscape Scalable charm bundle on a single virtual machine and deploy each charm into a separate LXD container. At the end, I will expose the HAProxy LXD container and show you how to make HAProxy accessible via the host machine's IP address. Let's go to the Oracle Public Cloud dashboard. So when you first log into Oracle Public Cloud, this is the page that you're going to be greeted with. Click on the hamburger menu at the top left, click on Compute and Instances. From there, you'll see a table with instances that are running or instances that you recently terminated. Go ahead and click on the Create Instance button. And let's give our instance a name that will be, I like to use the host name. It just makes it simpler when you're leafing through your virtual machines. So we'll call this one landscape.oracle.rajanpatel.com. It's going to be in the always free eligible availability domain. And let's change the image and the shape. So for the image, we'll select Jammy Jellyfish, the latest Ubuntu LTS. Select image. And then for shape, we will select Ampere. And Oracle's free tier allows you to have up to 4 virtual machines, or perhaps more, well, 4, up to 4, using up to 4 OCPUs and up to 24 gigabytes of memory. You can have 4 machines, 1 OCPU in each, but for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to max this slider out. We'll go to 4 OCPUs, and it'll automatically update the memory to 24 gigabytes. You could run Landscape Scalable on a single OCPU with 4 gigabytes of memory, but just for the purpose of keeping things moving along fast, we will select the highest options. I'll talk more about the networking options shortly, but next we want to add the public SSH key, or a key file rather, that we're going to use to access our machine over SSH. So I've added my .pub file over here, and then click on the Create button. If you get this message saying that you're out of capacity in this availability domain, it's likely that you have been spinning up machines, shutting machines down. To resolve that, scroll back up to the top and change your availability domain. You have a choice of 3. So I'll select AD1 and then try to create the machine again. Now we're off to the races. In a few moments, I will get my public-facing IP address, which I can then copy to clipboard, take to my, well, I've got my domain parked at Google Domains, but you can take it to Cloudflare or wherever else you're maintaining your DNS records, and add the appropriate A record pointing this host name that you plan on using, or fully qualified domain name, with the public IP address that you're assigned. So I've copied my public IP address to clipboard, and I'm going to go ahead and manage my A record. I'd like to set my TTL period to 10 minutes. I'm doing quick demos like this. I may want to update often, and having the record cached across multiple different places is not so desirable. So that seems to be set. I mentioned that we would talk about networking again later. Let's revisit that. So once the machine is up and running, you've got your public IP address, you can go ahead and edit the subnet. So under primary VNIC, you see subnet and whatever you've named your subnet. Click on that and scroll down to security lists and click on your default security list. These are your Ingress rules, and by default, port 22 is enabled. We want to allow incoming traffic on port 80 and port 443. If you choose not to use DNS-based validation for your certbot, you could have a custom port for certbot as well, perhaps 8888. But this is the simplest way. So I'll add rules for the source CIDR being all zeros, so that I can accept connections from anywhere in the world. Now, by no means are you recommended officially to allow incoming connections from anywhere in the world. Pick rules that are sensible for you. So if you're managing machines in a particular IP subnet, be selective about what addresses you're putting in there, unless you have an actual need for allowing incoming connections from everywhere in the world. And I should be ready to SSH into my machine at this point. First, let's check to make sure that the machine is in fact reachable by that host name. So we'll query the A record using the host command. And it appears that it is in fact accessible by that host name. So Let's SSH into that machine. Great. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is flush the extremely restrictive IP tables rules that Oracle places on their machines by default. Should spell filter correctly. That filter persistent save. And so this persistent save instruction is to ensure that these IP tables rules, after they're flushed, it remains in effect upon reboot. Now that that's done, let's sudo snap install Juju. And bootstrap Juju so that we're spinning up the charms that we deploy on LXD containers on the local host. When you run Juju bootstrap localhost, it's going to create two models. One model is going to be for your controllers, and then the other model, also it's called the default model, that will be for the LXD containers that whatever charms you deploy, they'll fall into that. You'll notice here that Juju is attempting to make some network connections to these controllers that it has set up. And you need to have the IP tables rules flexible enough to allow that communication to happen. So the very first thing we did was to flush those rules. If you had not flushed those rules, then this is where it would hang. We're almost done because it's running the machine configuration script. Perhaps we're not almost done. The first time you run this, it does take a hot minute, but if you were to destroy our controller and then start over again, it is a bit snappier. All right. So we can see the outcome by typing Juju status, and you can see that the model is empty. So let's go ahead and let Juju know that we have a model constraint. This is an ARM-based virtual machine. So we want to set the model constraint for the architecture to reflect that all of the containers will need to be ARM64 containers. It's not set model constraint, but it's set model constraints. Here we are. And once that's done, we can deploy Landscape Scalable. Now, remember, Landscape Scalable is our charm bundle. And we want to specify the channel. So we're getting the beta from Edge. So that Landscape Scalable bundle is at revision 11. And you can see that one of the things that it did was deploy a HAProxy charm. And then it added some relations for that HAProxy charm. That HAProxy charm is going to have a self-signed SSL certificate. And I mentioned earlier that we're going to have a valid SSL certificate. So we'll address that shortly. But how will we get a valid SSL certificate? So I'm getting it from LetsEncrypt. So let's sudo snap install certbot. Certbot makes it incredibly easy to get a valid SSL certificate for these kinds of applications where you want to spin something up quickly. You have two ways of using certbot. You can let certbot communicate over a particular port on the machine, or you can use DNS-based authentication or validation, rather. I prefer the DNS-based approach. That way I don't have to open up firewalls unnecessarily. So let's do sudo certbot, specify the domain, and we chose landscape.oracle.com. We're going to be doing this manually. And my preferred challenge is going to be through DNS. And let's go ahead and get that cert. I'll provide my email address. Accept the terms, and I am willing to be communicated with via email. And so this is the host name that we need to have the TXT record for. So I'll copy the relevant portion of it to my clipboard, go to my DNS settings, and create a new record for that particular host name. So I need to create a TXT record. And I'll give it a 10-minute TTL to paste that value in there. Now it says on my DNS configuration side that the record has been applied. How do I know for sure? So if I do a quick check, I'll copy this to clipboard. So I'm using host-t, checking the TXT record for that host name. Looks good. So I can go ahead and press enter to continue and have confidence that I'm going to get a valid SSL certificate from this. And it worked. So my certificate is saved at this location. I'm going to go ahead and copy that to clipboard because I'm going to base 64 encode this. Recall I mentioned that HAProxy was previously deployed with a self-signed SSL certificate. So the reason that I am going to base 64 encoded is because I can pass that base 64 encoded certificate as a parameter in my Juju charm redeployment of HAProxy. So we'll do sudo base 64 -w0 so that I get everything on one line, and then the path to my full chain. So I'm adding that that full chain into a variable called full chain, and it now contains that base 64 encoded blob. So the private key is going to be done the same way. Sudo base 64 encode, and I'll copy the private keys location, set in there. So that's set. Let's see how far along our machine deployments have been going. So it appears that HAProxy has run into a bit of a hiccup, but that shouldn't be much of a worry. We're going to get rid of HAProxy anyway. So let's remove application HAProxy and remove it forcefully. Now, when you remove an application like this by force, it's going to ensure that the unit and the machine are also removed. If you want to be certain, then you can also do a Juju remove unit HAProxy/0, because it was the first time we had you run this HAProxy charm deployment. And by this time, it's probably already gone. I was mistaken. So it's removing the unit. And then the next thing that I want to do is to remove machine 0. Machine 0 is HAProxy. When you deploy the landscape scalable charm bundle, the very first machine that gets deployed is HAProxy. So, Juju machine. It's going to have to be Juju remove dash machine. Okay, machine 0 not found. Great. So let's see what our Juju status looks like now. So it looks like Landscape Server is awaiting a HAProxy to show up, and it's waiting on relations. So the next step here would be to deploy HAProxy. Juju deploy HAProxy. Let's configure the default timeouts. Q be 60,000. Connect will be 5,000. Find will be 120,000. 0 there. Server will be 120,000. That's all we've got there. Config services, it's going to be empty. And this is the fun part, the SSL certificate. Remember, we had the full chain as a variable, so that makes that part convenient. Then the key, also a variable, so priv key. We're going to do our global default bind options. Block TLS version 1.0 connections. That's duplicated. And we're going to deploy all of this to the focal Ubuntu 2004 container. That looks right, so off to the races. Next, we will want to relate the Landscape server with HAProxy. As you can see in the earlier Juju status, it was awaiting that relation. So this is moving along. It seems like we already have an IP address for our new HAProxy instance. So let's go ahead and start with the network configurations. First, the LexD machines, they have their own firewall. So we'll want to expose this machine so that it can communicate with the host network interface. As easy as Juju expose HAProxy. And it is now exposed. But there's more to it than that. We have to identify the interface IP, and the container IP for this HAProxy instance. And it's easy enough to type IPA and identify these machines. Identify these entities. I know that this is my network interface, and I know that this is my IP address on that network interface. And I know that my container IP address is this right here. But you may want to programmatically identify, perhaps programmatically is not the right way, but in a scriptable manner, identify what these values are going to be. And we'll put them into a variable for convenience. But first, we're going to identify the interface. That's going to be with the IP command, rep for default, rep again, and do some regex magic. echo interface, it says ENPOS3. Next, we'll want to get the interface IP address. So let's say interface IP. Got our interface IP there. And lastly, the container IP. You can get that using Juju run. Now note it's our HAProxy /1 because we've removed our HAProxy /0. And we want to network get public ingress address equals true. Should do the trick. So if we echo the container IP, getting that successfully now as well. So we want to do a port forwarding rule for port 443 and port 80. So I'll specify port 443 first, and now we will do the IP tables command. Destination container IP script. Let's give it a comment. Now this should be reusable for the subsequent command as well. So if we do port 80 and rerun it, we change the variable for port from 443 to now port 80, and we're going to rerun it. And that should set up our IP address forwarding the way we want it. We can verify that our port forwarding rules are in there correctly. So let's do sudo iptables -t nat -l and print out line numbers just for fun. Here are our two port forwarding rules. We've got our port 80 and our port 443 right there. So looks like we're in good shape. At this point, we could probably pull up a browser and access landscape. Let's just verify that everything is in order with Juju status. And it looks like it is. Here we are. So our address was landscape.oracle.rajanpatel.com. And voila, it looks like it's running. So I'll go ahead and accept all and visit the site and fill in my relevant details. Go ahead and sign up. Now you're logged in to your Juju deployed landscape on Oracle Public Cloud. So these commands installed Juju, bootstrapped it, and made Juju aware that all our container images must work with 64-bit ARM processors. We deployed the beta version of the Landscape Scalable Charm Bundle from the Edge channel. Next, we obtained an SSL certificate from LetsEncrypt. We used the DNS challenge to validate our request because HAProxy is using the port certbot typically communicates over. And it's possible to use HTTP validation on a custom port, but in the interest of not wanting to open up additional ports on the Oracle firewall, we avoided it by validating with a DNS TXT record. Then we redeployed HAProxy. Notice that in step 9, we are taking the private key and the full chain and applying them as parameters. The base 64 encoded versions of those things are being applied as parameters for the SSL cert and SSL key values. And at the very end, we exposed HAProxy with Juju and applied some IP tables port forwarding rules to make the container accessible. Accessible through the host machine's network interface. To configure IP tables correctly, you need to know the network interface name, the external facing IP address on that interface, and the HAProxy LXD container's IP address. Now, I promised that if you were following along, I would show you how to revert back to your original state. It's possible if you feel like you've messed up along the way and you want to go back to the beginning, you can destroy your controller. If you don't want to destroy your controller gracefully, you can forcefully and instantly blow it all up using the kill controller option. And if you're playing around with your IP tables rules, it helps to print them out, particularly when you're dealing with the port forwarding rules. And then you can identify which ones you want to remove. So if you want to remove the first 2, then you can run sudo iptables-t nat-d prerouting 1. That 1 represents the first line. The thing to be careful about here is when you're deleting a line from your IP tables port forwarding rules, all of the line numbers will shift up for the ones below the one that you deleted. So be careful of that. And that's a wrap. I hope your takeaway from this session was that Juju is versatile and simplifies your life. And if your Ubuntu footprint is growing and you're interested in participating in Landscape's evolution, the Landscape beta may be a compelling offering for you. I wish you happy trails as you deploy Landscape via Juju in your environments, particularly on Oracle Public Cloud. And look forward to interacting with you folks on the Landscape discourse forums. Thanks.